Welcome back to the Build Boldly podcast. I'm your host, Pat Rodgers, and today we are talking marketing, and I am very excited to have Rachael Coverdale here. Rachael is the CEO and founder of Coverdale Consulting, and they truly cover the gamut. I have many folks that I've worked with that have also worked with Coverdale, and I'm very excited to dive in with Rachael and share all of the insights and tidbits about marketing. Rachael, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I would love to just start with your version of what you do at Coverdale, because I think it's always important to put some context on when people think marketing, there's, one thought, this thought, but what are you covering and how do you support clients today?
Sure. So I started Coverdale Consulting 11 years ago. Prior to that, I was always in the marketing or, in a business development role and just always had that entrepreneurial spirit. So when I started the company, I know I wanted to take everything I learned from previous roles and bosses and companies and do it a little bit differently. Um, we work very closely with our clients ongoing. One, we really understand their business, what makes them unique, what's their culture like, really get ingrained with our clients, and then understand their high level goals. And then from there, we use marketing to really put a plan together and work towards accomplishing those big high level goals. And then we're on the execution side. So we're leading the marketing strategy and then we're executing social media, email campaigns, digital advertising, PR, design, really the full spectrum of marketing services.
Wonderful. And we will dive into each of those pieces. That came at you fast, but there are so many elements to truly have a marketing engine behind you. And I love that you guys approach this as consulting, because I think that there is not just marketing involved when you're trying to build and grow a business. And one of the things that we kind of chatted a little bit about before we dove in today is that kind of common thread of, from a strategic standpoint as a business owner, it's not just committing to the spend or the activities or the execution that you mentioned. It's really 360 degrees of us all believing and marching in the same direction. How do you think about that in terms of kind of building that muscle for a business of really making this a part of the business, not just a business unit?
Yes, I think that's a great question because a lot of people do just think about marketing as this separate function or activity that they have to do. Like everyone does marketing, we should do marketing. But we look at marketing through a sales lens and really try to understand like what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to get more leads? Are we trying to get in front of a new target audience? Are you just wanting more visibility? Really understanding that sales revenue growth component and then tailoring the marketing strategy and activities around that. So I don't think it's a one size fits all for any company. You have to understand what you're trying to accomplish first.
I love that, because I think that's always a challenge. We have the age old tale of, well, it's sales fault or it's marketing's fault or
Right.
what have you. I think of it as it's revenue's fault. And if we have not, kind of combined these two functions and said, how are we getting there? Why do we want to be there? And marching in the same direction and kind of sharing that constant feedback between both sides, we're really going to fail no matter how we try to approach this. And so I love that perspective of kind of building that throughout. And one of the things that you mentioned is that it's not just you don't just work with customers on, okay, here is our goal and here's how we're going to approach it, but there's also the internal communications and the internal commitments that you work with business leaders on to truly get this thing off the ground. And I'd love to get your perspective, because I think I have an idea of why that's so important from a top down perspective, but how do you kind of get that out of a leader and get them working in that direction so that they really have this cohesive goal across the business?
I think it starts with business owners first really committing to being consistent and being patient about, understanding what marketing is going to do and how it's going to impact their business. Because I think a lot of owners get frustrated, a month or two in, they're like, our business hasn't grown by X yet. It's like, well, it takes consistency. Um, but I think it starts with your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? And then consistently executing on it, on the strategy, and then reevaluating through analytics. But also just what are those kind of invisible analytics, I'll call it, that are happening? Is your sales team, are you hearing back from them that they're getting to a meeting with a prospect and they're saying, it's so great to meet with you. I've, heard about your company. I know a little bit about you. Like that makes that salesperson's job so much easier. So I think it's understanding that all of those components have to work together and you have to have a comprehensive approach. You can't just do, you know, you just can't focus on LinkedIn or you just can't focus on having, video. You have to really have it all.
I love that, and I think that's a good segue into kind of the why is marketing required today? And I think it's becoming less of a barrier for business owners to understand that yes, I need to be out there. But I think it's one of those where truly understanding that if you can't be found, then there is no opportunity to be had. And
Mhm.
so when you talk about that kind of, you can't look at just one lane and you really have to have kind of a holistic. What are some of the key lanes? And maybe we'll start at a high level and then we can kind of drill down. But what are some of those key things that business owners should be looking at and ensuring is a part of their overall strategy?
I think it depends on if we're talking B2C or B2B. Typically, advertising is a huge spend for B2C, depending on the industry and the company, and what kind of customers or clients you're trying to acquire. On the B2B side, I think it's a little bit of a different approach. Either way, though, I think having a true comprehensive approach of being where you know that your customers or prospects are. You got to go where they are. You can't expect them to come to you. I
Mhm.
think you have to start with that. And you know that no matter if you're B2C or B2B, that prospects are going to be doing their research, even if it's just a quick check to your website, maybe a couple social pages. If you're a B2C, maybe your reviews. So they're going to get an impression of you potentially before you even get in front of them.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
as we think about that kind of prospect and, the ideal client profile is probably a good place to start. Then you kind of get into some of the buyer personas depending on how deep you're
Mhm.
going. If we're in the B2B land, we really got to nail that buyer persona. Whereas, I think it's more so who is my customer in the B2C land. Where do you recommend if you're coming into a business and you're just starting to have these conversations and they're like, yeah, we could sell to everyone, And then I
Yeah.
think that is how most people think when they're starting a business. How do you start to help them drill down into that ideal client profile so that they can understand those lanes that they need to attack to meet that customer where they are?
Mhm. Right when I start working with a client, I always start with a whiteboard session of really digging into services, what's an ideal project or an ideal client for you? Because I agree, I've heard that a lot that well, we'll work with anyone who wants to work with us.
Yeah.
But I always ask them, okay, well, what's your ideal client? If you could list all the qualities of an ideal client, what would that look like? And I think that's helpful to narrow it down that way. And then again, just going back to that sales lens of what client is going to drive the most revenue or the most profitability um, for what makes sense for your business. And I think that's a great place to start.
Absolutely, yeah. It is always interesting because I think no matter what, folks have this kind of, rosy glasses when you're starting to think about who we can sell to, and I think it's, an experiment in a lot of ways when you're first drilling down into this, and then I think you mentioned earlier using those analytics, and once you do have, some of these programs up and running, whether that be Meta ads for Facebook and Instagram or Google ads or whatever lane you're kind of focused on, that can then also start to help you hone in on, well, who's actually converting and how do we leverage that information to drive it further. When you're starting with folks, how often do they not have technology in place that would allow them to actually track these analytics?
You'd be surprised at the size of companies, um, that don't have a CRM or don't have an organized up to date database of contacts. But the good news is it's pretty easy to get all of those things up to speed. And I think for analytics, you need to look at it holistically, but you also can't look at it just how did we do this month? Like for our analytics reports, we do a trailing 12 so we can really understand, you know, how are we doing today versus 6 months ago? And if there's a dip, we need to dig into that data to understand like, okay, what was going on during this dip is what we were doing not working anymore, and if it's not, then we need to pivot. So I think it's really paying attention to what patterns are emerging, and then marketing is also a lot of experimenting, just like you mentioned. Something that it changes so fast of platforms and what's available that you got to be ready to pivot.
Absolutely. It is interesting too because owners just wanna see that result. I'm putting money out there, and I
Mhm.
just wanna see that result, and I think you bring up a good point of that dip may have nothing to do with how we spent money, how we approached this, For our business, as an example, August tends to be one of our slowest months. Well, everybody's going back to school. Everyone's, not going to move to a new warehouse unit because I'm, getting my kids ready or I'm traveling for the last week of summer, and then January, well, it's freezing outside. I'm probably not going to, haul my things from one warehouse unit to another, but we can't stop that momentum and we can't stop that marketing because I still may capture somebody. They're just not going to convert in that month. And I think that's something interesting that I'm sure you deal with all the time. How do you kind of coach a new customer or a business owner on those moments of let's take, 50 steps back and say, what else could have happened here versus the gut knee jerk reaction? Well, we just can't spend that much anymore because it didn't work. I'm sure
Right.
that happens quite a bit.
We meet with our clients either every week or biweekly. So we're pretty in tune with what's going on in their business. And we always start the meetings off with, what are your updates? What's coming up? What challenges are you guys facing right now? Like what's your team saying? So I feel like we can anticipate some of those things and just talking about those proactively, especially since we do work with our clients so long term. We can say, okay, remember, last year, this is the time, like this is the pattern that we see. Um, but just going back to that consistency piece, it sounds so easy. You just got to be consistent. But
Yeah,
it's so difficult, and people have a million things going on, and I feel like sometimes marketing can be one of those things that gets pushed to the bottom of the priority list for business owners. So, I think hanging in there, being consistent, and just what you said, you may have that prospect, they're not ready to buy right then, but staying on their radar is so important. So when they are ready to make that decision, you're the very first person or first company that they think about.
that's great. And I love that first company they're thinking about because I'm curious, when we think about that first step, because really what we're trying to do in marketing is engage, have awareness, and hopefully have enough of a hook to say, let's have a conversation, or if we're full B2C and in e-commerce, let's have a transaction. So whatever that outcome is that we're looking for, when you think about that from a product offering standpoint and what we're leading with, or maybe the message that we're leading with, how do you think about that from the marketer's lens? Because there's always that outcome of the seller is like, I want the big ticket item, but sometimes we've got to get them in the door and build up to some of those things. How do you look at that from that standpoint? And do you work with clients on what is the right thing to lead with versus let's lead with everything and in different scenarios that may play out there?
In terms of messaging?
Yeah, I think messaging and even just, the offer maybe that you're making of this product or this starting point, in terms of where you begin that, client journey with somebody.
Mhm. I think messaging is so important, like, having foundational messaging from the beginning that really speaks to what's your unique value and who are you as a company, and how are you gonna talk to your clients and your prospects. Um, Being on the same page, as a team and as a company, that's number 1. I think that's so important, and I've seen a lot of owners, of course, we wanna be different, and they wanna be different how they're presented in the market, but you also have to balance that with being clear. You don't wanna have a bunch of abstract or way out there language and messaging that you think is really cool, but, the prospects just they're not gonna get it quickly,
Mhm.
and the environment that we live in now, like, we're inundated with information and marketing, and you get a quick glance, especially if you're, running ads or something, and be clear.
Right. It's like I saw a stat recently. There's like, especially social, you might have a half of a second
Right.
to get this message across before I keep scrolling. So we've got to be clear and consistent on how we actually present, or else we're going to get missed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that it starts with a business, because I think this kind of comes back to one of the first points that we talked about of starting with who you are as a business and your culture and your people. And I think that's been an interesting, I wouldn't say it's a new concept, but I think that we're seeing consumers kind of shift back to this trust component. And I have unlimited options. So who do I trust and who do I believe in that will ultimately, supply what I'm looking for?
Mhm.
That seems to be kind of that underlying thread that we keep pulling throughout of establishing your culture, establishing, who you are. How important is that in terms of, the beginning foundation of kind of your marketing approach and bringing that all the way through from top to bottom?
So important. I think today more than ever, it's important to be so authentic that people can feel that. Um, saying things in your messaging like, "Trust us," or, I always laugh at that because it's like people are saying like, "Trust us," but do you really have to say "trust us" if that's, in your messaging and people should just understand that? But having your entire company on the same page and really focusing on that internal communications and internal marketing piece, like we've seen over the last 5 years, like that has really been a pattern that's emerged with our clients that they're taking the time to think about that piece where I don't feel like a lot of companies did that before. And their employees can be their biggest advocates. So you need to make sure that you're arming them with the right messaging and the right way to talk to potential clients, no matter what their role is in the company. So that I think start there.
Right. Well, I think that that's a really interesting point, because we could say trust us and we're
Yeah.
so easy to work with, and I click on that and I have my first meeting and it's the most uncomfortable, awkward meeting ever.
Right.
And now I'm like, well, what the heck happened? Right. And so you've got to be able to educate, and I think that's such an interesting piece that oftentimes we kind of put in the sales bucket and say, okay, messaging for sales and how you run that conversation, that's all over here. It's not really in marketing. But in
Mhm.
reality, we really should have that kind of same conversation style, brand personality, etc., all the way through so that when you do actually get the opportunity that's going to convert to revenue, we're ready to have that conversation in the right way.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And if I would encourage any company, if their marketing team, whether that's internal or external, and they're not meeting regularly with their business development team, I think that's a miss because it's such a huge opportunity to hear from your business development team. Like, what are they hearing as feedback? What are the pushbacks they're hearing? What are the positives that they're hearing? And then, as a marketing expert, like, how do we take those things that we hear and turn that into great marketing messaging, campaigns?
Absolutely. And that falls all the way through that kind of content side too, because we can often think content's front end, but I think there's so much in my experience and a lot of the businesses we've been able to really grow is if I'm working with marketing on some of those objections, maybe on some of the questions that follow up, and then I have a very well done piece of content as a follow up or a nurture campaign in email, I can now mitigate some of those issues either by the time we have a conversation or during the sales process. And I feel like that's always a huge miss for businesses. It's like, all right, marketing got us the conversation. See you later. Stay in your lane. We're good. But I feel like
Right.
that is such a huge miss if we don't pull it all the way through.
I can give you a good example. A B2B company that does multi-million dollar construction projects. And one marketing strategy that I think is very important, whether you're B2B or B2C, is having consistent email campaigns. I think the misconception is like, oh, well, everyone gets too much email. But if you do it the right way, the content's valuable and you do it consistently, I think there's a huge ROI to that. So our construction company, like, are they going to get a multi-million dollar project from one email campaign? No.
Right.
But we sent out an email campaign about, their work in building jails, and it went to a database full of municipal contacts, sheriffs, fire chiefs, etc. And they got an email response back and said, oh, hey, I didn't know that you guys were doing jails. We're actually getting ready to start planning for the new construction of one. Would love to meet with you. And that turned into a jail project. So I think that's an important piece for B2B business owners to remember. Like, are you going to get a $1 million project from a social post? And probably not.
Yeah.
But all of that combined is leading to that multi-million dollar project.
Yep. Absolutely. And that consistency just keeps being that theme out there. So I
It
love
is.
that. Yep. Absolutely.
Growing a business shouldn't cost you your sanity. One founder told us,
had I not made that decision to go into this space, my business, my personal life, and my sanity and my family's sanity would have dwindled very quickly.
Rise exists to support real entrepreneurs through real growth by giving you secure, flexible space and the support to scale without burning out. Office, warehouse, and business space, all designed to help you work smarter, not harder. Learn more or book a free space planning call at risecommercialdistrict.com.
So when you're thinking about what metrics, because I know you mentioned you're looking at analytics, you're looking at year over year, month over month, but what are some of the key metrics that a business owner should be thinking about? And if they do have, whether it's internal marketers or working with an external partner like Coverdale, what are those key metrics that they should be looking at throughout the funnel that you tend to lean on to say, are we moving in the right direction or do we need to pivot?
Engagement would be the number one thing that I would look at. what is your engagement numbers say across the board from social to email to website? Because I think a lot of business owners or, whoever's um, interested in the marketing component at a company is like, get us some more followers on, Facebook or LinkedIn.
Yeah,
And I understand why people would say that. But, if it's all the wrong followers or they're not engaging with your content, it doesn't matter how many you have. It's all about like, are they understanding your content? Are they sharing it? Are they commenting? What does that engagement piece look like? Because I think you think about the digital sales funnel and where are those people in that funnel? Are they, at the top of awareness? Are they engaged? Are they, close to closing? Like, what does that look like? And then tracking that in your metrics.
that's great. In engagement, I want to click down on a little bit, because I think that there's some misconceptions because you mentioned the let's get more followers. And
Yeah.
so you have your kind of, let's call it impressions or views. And then we've got, time on site and we've got, the click to convert and engagement. You also have kind of the email side, depending on where you're looking at of opens and which is a challenging metric in today's iPhone world. But how do you define engagement and knowing that you have it and that you're kind of moving in the right direction on engagement?
I define engagement as any kind of action that someone would take, whether it's liking it, comment if we're talking about social, liking it, commenting, clicking. Same thing for like an email, opening, clicking. So really about taking an action.
Got it.
If they're
Absolutely.
not interested, they're just gonna move on.
Keep on keep
So
on scrolling. Impressions
right.
are great, but it's awareness. You haven't reached the mid funnel of engagement if we're just scrolling through.
Right, and I think that's a number to look at is if you're just getting a lot of views, but you're not getting any engagement. Is it your messaging? Is it your timing? Is it the people that are looking at it? You gotta dig down into that and figure out why. Why aren't they engaging?
Absolutely. And that is that messaging piece I think is so important because that's something we look at constantly is all right, we're getting a lot of eyeballs, so we're at least in the right place. And so
Right.
now we're in the right place. How do we actually drive that to an engagement moment, which gives us permission to continue that conversation? I think that's really what you're looking at the top of the funnel. And then as you kind of think about that down funnel movement, and now we're looking at, okay, we're paying for clicks potentially, we're getting some of these conversations, or we're at least getting lead forms, and then are we converting those lead forms? We start to move into that sales to marketing transition. And when you're looking at that with a business, obviously, I think we'll both just say, get a CRM, please, please, please get a CRM.
Yes.
But as you get into that, how often are you helping them understand their sales funnel versus their marketing funnel? Because I think that's an interesting transition and knowing that you're kind of working across the business. How much are you involved in that? And what recommendations do you have as people are thinking about moving it from the marketing funnel into the sales funnel?
You absolutely have to be in tune with sales. How are they defining a sale? How are they tracking it? We need all that info and feedback as marketers again to understand and refine if we aren't driving those leads and those conversions. Um, but marketing and sales should be totally in sync. And I can't stress that enough because all the information that you're going to get in addition to the analytics is just important.
Absolutely. I love when companies do a sales kickoff and every marketer is also there. And if it's a sales training and there's a new marketer, let's have that marketer join sales training, right? Because I think it's understanding those touch points and those conversion moments because there is oftentimes, hey, we have a ton of leads. And then the first thing, well, they're not great leads is what you hear and you're like, well, let's look into this, let's look into the conversation that happened, let's look into those pieces. And so bringing that organism together I think is so important, and keeping that alignment just drives so much more success than attempting to keep these siloed. And I think that's can be a challenge, especially when you're working with a outside provider like Coverdale. So how do you get that buy-in? Because I know sales leaders. I've been a sales leader. There is can be rough around the edges. How do you get that buy-in from them to make sure that we're staying in sync and driving outcomes?
First, you have to set the expectation that it may not happen overnight, but if you can be patient and we're putting out high quality marketing, whether it's content or campaigns or ads or messaging, high quality strategic marketing should return an ROI. And if it's not, then there's an issue, is what I would say.
Somewhere in the funnel, there is an
Yes,
issue.
there is an issue. So I think helping business development people really understand the role that marketing can play in making their jobs easier and their conversations easier with prospects. I think that's key. But just that constant feedback, I just can't stress how helpful that is for your
Yep.
marketing team.
That's great. And I love that, and I'm gonna make somewhat of a big pivot here, but I think it stays in line because I think we've talked about some of the foundational pieces of how do we get this thing going? How do we get this thing off the ground? What do we need to have in place? One of the things that I think is emerging very quickly, and I would be remiss if we didn't dive into it, is Gen AI and search through Gen AI and those elements. Because I think the interesting part, and this is where we kind of bring that circle back, is that the questions that we're searching for in generative AI are the questions that your salespeople are receiving. And so if we're not having that feedback loop of what are those questions and what's the right answer and what's the right way to have this available for Gen AI to actually find can be a huge miss in terms of how you're building that. So from your lens, I guess to start, how important is it and how are you helping businesses understand that lane that is just growing and emerging so quickly, how they should attack it and how they should think about it today?
You're right. That is something that a lot of companies are trying to figure out. And I'm always surprised by the number of companies or people that I talk with that really haven't integrated AI at all in their company. And I think it is confusing for business owners and leadership to understand like, well, it kind of like it goes back to that marketing concept of, oh, everyone's doing it. I need to be doing it.
Yeah.
Or on social media. I need to be on social media. Everyone's using AI. I need to be using AI. But I think there's a lot of education that goes into one understanding AI and all of its capabilities, and then pairing that with what are your goals and who are your ideal customers and what are they searching and where are they going to find you, where are they going to do their research, and having that solid understanding before you even get to the AI part
Yep. Yep.
is
Right.
key.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been interesting to watch just the kind of trends of how much of our traffic is coming from those, solutions like your chat, GPT and Claude and everything versus the other lane being that Gemini is now appearing at the top of Google versus your Google ads. And so it's
Right.
such a dynamic moving piece. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons to make sure that you do have a strong advocate, a strong, whether it is a consultant or someone internal that is trying to keep up because marketing is just this ever evolving,
Yeah.
ever changing beast. And I'm sure that's something that, you think about all the time. How should businesses think about that? Because I love that you mentioned like where are your customers? Because we don't
Hmm.
need to overinvest in something that they're not there. But how do you get that kind of balance of let's stay ahead of the game while making sure that we're attacking the right lanes?
Marketing, like the perfect recipe for marketing, I think is strategy, creativity, and ROI. And the ROI part is the analytics, or like what's marketing bringing back for your company? What's the value? So it is such a difficult and challenging balance sometimes, but if you lay the expectations and you truly go into it understanding that you have to have patience, and it's not exactly a math equation that you can just you turn this button and tweak this here and it's gonna, spit back out exactly what you want. Like, it is a lot of experimenting, and hopefully if you're a business owner, you're gonna have that risk characteristic,
Right. Right.
and you're okay with saying, like, absolutely, like, if that's something that we should be doing that's going to bring us value in business, then we should at least try it. um, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and we pivot to try something else. But I think you do have to experiment, especially with something with AI that is so still early in what it can do in terms of marketing and being found, and it just adds a whole nother layer to marketing.
Absolutely. Well, I love that kind of piece of like being found, and I do want to dive in a little bit on that. There are so many small businesses that get started and they've got a handful of customers and they just get going, and maybe they throw up a landing page, maybe they just work off of their Gmail address. When you think about that kind of front door of a business, the welcoming mat, being your website, what is the kind of minimum you need to do or minimum viable product that we can put out there in terms of a website to make sure that we're communicating correctly and that we can be found? What are some of those kind of foundational pillars that just need to be there for starting a business?
I always say you have to commit to what you can stick to. So when it comes to social, if your resources are limited and you can only stick to posting on Instagram or LinkedIn, think about where your ideal customer is. Get on that platform. If you can't do 4 platforms, then just stick to the one. um, and then having a website, as websites have evolved over the years, like now more than ever, it's pretty cost effective to get a professional looking website. So I think those are 2 key things. But before all of that, going back to that messaging, I think if you're gonna make a spin somewhere, you got to get that right first, because foundational messaging drives what your internal team's saying. It drives how your potential customers are understanding your business. And it's really the point of truth that you'll refer to for all social posts, email campaigns, website content, collateral. And if you don't have that, then you're just trying to rethink about how you can say this differently or this differently for every marketing piece you're doing, and then the market becomes all confused. They don't know.
Right. 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 Well, I think that is the other aspect, that if you're new at this, AI can really help you. Like,
Totally.
using Gemini to create a logo, or asking, Claude or ChatGPT to
Mhm.
tell me, how would you synthesize this paragraph into 2 sentences so that I can be clear and concise, right? Like, there
Yes,
is so much of that to your point now, when you're just getting off the ground and you just have to start somewhere, leveraging those tools to help you on that front makes the world of difference and can truly be done in an hour
mhm,
versus, what used to take, weeks to get done. And so I think that's a really interesting point to get started and get the momentum going, because if there isn't consistency across your brand, every new place I see that's different, I'm confused and I'm going somewhere else. And I think that's just the squirrel brains we have now. Is like, I need to know this is the same place I thought I was going. And if it's not, I'm moving on.
absolutely. I use AI, and my platform of choice is ChatGPT right now, but I use it for one research, like the other day, I pulled, we were looking at taglines for a company, and I wanted to see what competitors in their market had as their tagline. So I had ChatGPT pull 30 of their um, closest competitors and what their taglines were, because right, you want to see what your competitors are doing, but you want to be unique also. I use AI as a brainstorming tool for what I do. I feel like I always have a million different ideas or thoughts, and sometimes it's hard for me to articulate exactly what I'm trying to get at. And ChatGPT has been huge in terms of really putting together all of my thoughts. And then third, I think using it as a brainstorming partner.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I love that kind of looking at competitors because there is this depending on what side of the coin you fit on, you're like, I don't care what my competitors doing, we're different. But then there's also like if you're a new business, the market has been established and they have spent millions and millions of dollars establishing what works. And so there's always a an opportunity to tag along but still be unique. And I think that's something that a lot of business owners need to lean into is understand how a huge business has spent millions to gain consumers' trust. They didn't do it by accident, right? Like, and you don't
Right.
have millions of dollars to spend. So let's see how we can, use this from our lens and build from there.
Absolutely. That's a tough one because you want to be unique, but you also want to be clear. And just like you said, some people have invested millions of dollars to do all of those experiments and get to a certain point for their messaging or their marketing strategy. And sure, take that as inspiration, but still make it your own.
Yep, absolutely. Be unique, but consistent and market appropriate, right? Is
Yes.
kind of that, the lens we can look at. So when you start with a group, I'm sure we talked about experimenting and we mentioned some lanes. There's, ad spend in general, which might be Google, which might be Meta on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, if you're in that world. I mean, there's so many paid advertising strategies. We kind of have the SEO, the search engine optimization, which may be local SEO, depending on where your business is, or Omni for chat and generative AI. You've got PR, you have all of these lanes. And so I'm sure when you're starting with a customer, you're going through these experiments. At what point do you feel like it's time to double down on lanes and get leaning in versus saying we're going to continue to try multiple places? Like what does that process look like? And I'm sure there's not a one size fits all, but how do you start to lean into that to know where to double down?
First, looking at your analytics, you should be looking at them monthly, if not more often than that. I mean, you don't want to look at it every day because that's not going to bring you any value. But after we do email campaigns, we usually do a 72-hour report after it's been sent just to see how it performed and in comparison with other email campaigns. And the example I gave earlier about the company um, sending out the email and then it turned into this big project, we may have never even heard about that it turned into a project if we weren't communicating with the leadership and the business development team. So I think that you can't miss that part either. Hearing that, this marketing activity turned into this business where it might not be captured specifically in analytics or digitally. So you really have to kind of look at it all and then say, okay, well, email campaigns, they're really working. We're getting, really big open rates. People are engaging with it. It sounds like you've gotten several meetings from it and one big project. So we know that email campaigns are, a strategy that can be very successful for this particular company. So and I think it's going beyond just email campaign, but what was in that email? What were you talking about? Like, what
Right.
really drove that engagement? And then taking that information and then putting that out on social or in video or collateral as
Yep.
well.
Absolutely. And sellers, if you're listening, this is why that primary source or whatever you put in there needs to be accurate. Give your marketing team some credit so that they can still drive more leads your way, right?
Yeah, we're trying to make their job easier for sure.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been awesome. There are kind of two questions I want to wrap up with
Okay.
and dive into. So, first, if there is one thing a business owner should start doing today in marketing as kind of just a baseline, is there one place they should start, and how would you recommend them going about that?
If they've already if they already have their goals set and they're clear on what they want to accomplish, I would think about who are they trying to get in front of and creating that messaging based on who their ideal customer is. Um, and then website, key, social, pick what you can commit to and be authentic to yourself, your brand, your company. And I think that really can come through. Like, don't try to be someone or a company that you're not because, prospects and customers are going to feel that.
Yep.
So, at minimum, I would have a great website. I think there's so many different options to go about um, developing a website now, and it can be very cost effective. And then committing to your social. If you can do email, I think email is still a very very strategic tool and activity that you can do. But I would start there.
Yep. Awesome.
Look at your
And
analytics.
right, stay on those analytics,
Yeah.
know what you're getting. So on the you know, groups that are starting to think about finding a consultant. They're thinking about
Mhm.
outsourcing. They may be just starting their journey. They want to expand and grow. What are the key things that they should be thinking about or asking that potential group so that they're not getting a bad partner, that they're not, it's not just another AI fluff machine that's out there trying to generate leads for themselves. They're picking a real partner. How do they decide between somebody that's going to support and grow versus somebody that might not be the best fit for them?
I think first you have to start with, does this partner match our culture, our approach, our values? I think that's really important if you're going to be working long term with a marketing person. You guys really have to be on the same page there. It is a commitment in terms of we meet with our clients every week. So, our clients have to be committed that,
Mhm.
they understand the value and they want to see the value that comes out of that marketing. It also depends on it varies if you're B2C or B2B and what your goals are, but with us you're getting a full team with a wide range of expertise, and sometimes it's almost the cost of what you would hire, like a chief marketing officer or a director of marketing, but you're getting all of this expertise. And I think marketing is hard because there's typically not one person that is an expert at messaging, design, digital advertising, PR. There's usually not one person that can do all of those things. That would be a unicorn. And
Yeah,
that's the challenge for sure. So knowing that you're going to get a marketing partner that has um, a broad range of expertise, I think is really important. And that they're not going to look at marketing as transactional. They're going to understand that sales and marketing should be in alignment. They're going to understand that you have to look at your analytics. You have to pivot when it makes sense. You have to ask all the right questions too. So those are some of the things that I look at too, like when we're thinking about working with a partner, like what's their approach to their business? Are they willing to take some risks and experiment with some things? Are they going to be patient? Do they understand what marketing can do for their business? All of those things.
that's wonderful. And I love the part you mentioned about the unicorn. I just want to be very clear. Anyone that tells you that they're a unicorn in marketing and they can do every aspect, they are lying to you
Right.
because it is just, it's impossible because there is so much, as we mentioned before, changing and evolving that one individual can't possibly do that. On top of that, if they have one person and more than two clients, you are at the bottom of the list all of a sudden, right? And so I think
Right.
there's so many of those pieces of, this I can do it all without a team is definitely something to run away from. So I appreciate you clicking down into that.
Yeah, and I think the other part to that is don't silo your marketing activities with multiple different vendors. Like, I wouldn't personally separate like digital advertising with one marketing partner, and then another marketing partner is running all my social, and then another marketing partner is doing all the PR. I think that's where there really begins to get a lot of disconnect. And I think people can feel that. So if possible, I would try and keep it all cohesive and together.
One, yeah, because you then have budget conflicts, you
Right.
have, outcome conflicts, you have finger pointing and no control over all of those different realms. So I appreciate that too, because I think that comes back to our thread. This messaging and this brand personality needs to be felt throughout, and if it's not cohesive, all of a sudden you've got one message over here and one message over there. So I appreciate that as well, because I think that is very common for people. Well, I could probably get this over here for a little cheaper. Well, that's not going to be cohesive to your brand, and in the end, you're probably losing dollars instead of making dollars. So I appreciate that line as
Right.
well.
Yeah, and then looking at the ROI, like I always say to clients, like if we're not bringing you value and we're not bringing you ROI, then move on from us because
Uh-huh.
we're not bringing you value. Like that's our job.
Yep. I love that. And if they're telling you that from the jump, then you're going to be in a good spot. So, Rachel, thank you so much for all these insights. I know that our audience is going to love this because I think it is such a important concept in today's world. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, guess we'll end it here. Until next time, we appreciate you listening. Thank you.